a year from now, when you look at this, and by the way, you should always be re-looking at the lifetime value of a customer. You should be constantly measuring it, and maybe updating that once, maybe even once a month. It depends on how many customers you have. But the whole idea here is to baseline it, track it, influence it, make it better, because it has so much upside, down the line. Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the NetBlaze podcast, marketing ideas for small businesses. Look, if you're concerned about getting new customers, keeping the customers that you have, and increasing the revenue, the lifetime value of those customers, then you've come to the right place, because we're here to help. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. And again, I find myself in my Chicago office, in NetBlaze's Chicago office. And while it's nice to be in Chicago, we are right on Michigan Avenue, so sometimes there'll be some sirens and other city noises, so I'll apologize up front. So today, pretty important topic, the lifetime value of a customer. What is that? Why is it important to talk about? Why is it important to, incorporate that into your marketing strategy and plans? So it may seem like kind of a sort of a straightforward and silly thing to talk about, the lifetime value of the customer. Well, gosh, that's easy. Yeah, I know it, or I never thought about it, or gosh, it must be pretty straightforward. But it's not. I'll tell you, when I, in my work with NetBlaze, NetBlaze.com and our software tool, I spent a lot of time and have spent a lot of time over many years talking to small local business owners. And one of the things I when I was doing some consulting for them many years ago, almost 15 years ago now, one of the questions I would ask up front was, well, what do you think you could spend to acquire a new customer? And I was always amazed to kind of hear the answers to that question. And it always told me a lot about where that person was, where that business owner was on their journey to come up with a really good digital marketing strategy, or just marketing strategy as a whole. Because in order to figure out what you could spend to get a new customer, you need to understand what a customer's worth. It's really that simple. I mean, if you have a customer that's worth $10,000 in profit to you, maybe you're an attorney or a real estate agent, then if you spent $5,000 to get that customer in advertising, well, that's still 100% return on investment. That's good, right? I mean, that's okay, even though that $5,000 sounds like an awful lot. Now, if you're a restaurant, maybe a diner, whose sort of average ticket value is $20, then spending $5,000 to get a new customer, probably that math doesn't work too well, And so it's that sort of thought process that's really, really important, and kind of, I think, will get you to thinking about why it's so important to understand the lifetime value of a customer. But it's even bigger than that. It's even bigger than trying to answer the question of, well, what should my marketing budget be? In other words, what can I spend to acquire a new customer? The bottom line is that it's far easier to sell something to an existing customer than it is to acquire a new one. And so tracking the customer, the lifetime value of a customer, and measuring it, tracking it, and trying to influence it over time so that it's that's obviously goes up, has a tremendous impact on how you can grow your business, particularly in the medium to long term kind of time frame. As you slowly ramp up and improve your lifetime value of a customer and start getting more and more new customers who you benefit from that increase in lifetime value. It's sort of just like this force multiplier, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so what do I mean by lifetime value of customer? Pretty straightforward. I like to think about it in terms of profit, but you can think about it in terms of revenue, and then just apply your general, if you're operating at a 20% profit margin, then you could just figure it out from there. So it's probably easiest to do with revenue, but I like to think about it as profit because and apply that profit percentage to it, because then it's easier to answer those questions about, well, how much can I spend, to get a new customer. But anyway, the definition of it is pretty straightforward. It is when you get a new customer, over the lifetime that you will interact with that customer. And some businesses that's once, and some businesses that's once a week for years. It just depends on the business. But over the lifetime of the timeline that you will interact with that customer, what are they worth in revenue and profit? So that's the definition. And we can use it for tracking it. We can use it for figuring out, well, how much should we spend to acquire a new one? We can try and increase revenue over time, because if we look at things where we can say, okay, well, how can we do that? Well, we could increase the number of interactions over the lifetime. If currently we are only interacting with customers once every 6 months, is there something we could do to interact with them once every 3 months? And obviously that interaction generates sales and revenue. So could we increase the number of lifetime interactions? Could we increase the revenue per interaction? Is there something we could do to influence that? So that's what I was talking about as kind of a force multiplier. As you track and understand the lifetime value of a customer, you can then start to influence it in a positive way by looking at all the different pieces that go into it, right? And trying to influence those. And it has this amazing impact on, kind of down the road. I think there was a study once that said if you can cut down on customer attrition, meaning losing customers, by like 5%, so just a 5% improvement, it generates ultimately about like a 30% profit improvement over time. So that, that's what I'm talking about as a force multiplier. It's a dramatic shift that you can make once you start to understand the lifetime value of the customer. You understand the pieces that go into it, and then you try to influence each of those pieces to make it better. The other thing that you can do is if you get more advanced at this, you can start to really segment your customers. Maybe depends on the type of business you're in. So what do I mean by that? Well, maybe this group of customers is worth way more lifetime value than this group. Okay. And again, it depends on the business that you're in. But let's say you're a builder. Well, maybe the people who are doing 4,000 square foot homes are worth way more than the people who are doing 2,000 square foot. Something like that. You could start to see that in the data. And then maybe, not always, but maybe you want to shift towards, the ones that give you the higher. That's one of the things maybe that you could do to influence the pieces of the lifetime value, is you could go after the right segment of customers. Now, again, it's not going to be applicable to everybody. If you're a retail store, you on Main Street, you want to bring everybody in, right? You're not going to say, well, I only want these kind of people. It doesn't work like that. Now, you could advertise to certain segments and stuff. So there's a million different things that you could do, but the key right now is to start thinking about this. Okay, so how do you start to develop this? Well, the first is you have to understand the average kind of when you have an encounter with a customer, what is the average amount of revenue that usually brings in? So if you're a restaurant, what's the typical check value, right? If you're a plumber, what's the typical invoice on a call? And you can look at your last 100 calls, you're right, add up all the invoice amounts and divide by 100, that's the average. Just make sure you have a big enough population sample. So you could use historical data from your business records, or you could make a guess, if you're just starting out. My personal opinion is you should make a guess until you have actual data to go back on, because an educated guess is always better than nothing. It's always better to start tracking things and get that discipline and get that baseline. It's better to do that than to be perfect. So you calculate the average purchase value. Then you want to understand the average frequency. So in other words, in a particular year, let's use a year time frame, how often are you going to interact with a normal, an average customer, right? Are they going to come into the restaurant twice a week, once a month, what it is, and then sort of extrapolate that out for a year. Now, you could do that by sort of the same thing. You could track your actual data. So if you're a plumber or something, you could go look back and say, okay, in a year, how many times did I see the average customer? And you could look at that in the data, based on their customer, depending on how you keep your data, but you could do that. Same with a restaurant. Maybe you do industry standard. Maybe you look up, you Google, how often do most people go to their favorite restaurant or something like that, so you could make an educated guess. There's lots of different ways, but start thinking about it and either use real data or make the best guess that you can. So now you have the average interaction value, you have the average number of interactions you do a year, and then you want to come up with, okay, well, what is the lifetime, the lifespan of a customer? So, and this is, I think, the hardest one to come up with, and I almost think it's somewhat meaningless. I would just use something like 5 years. And so, if you're a restaurant and you have somebody who now is a patron of yours, for how long will they actually be a patron and give you that average number of visits per year and that average check value per year? Personally, I would just use like 5 years. I think that's a decent average. Some businesses, every business is going to be different, right? So a lawyer, if you're a criminal lawyer, maybe it's really just one interaction. I mean, unless you have a habitual criminal or something, I don't know, or if you're a real estate agent, you're probably, even over 5 years, you really may only have one interaction, maybe two, maybe it's 1.5, something like that. And if you're a restaurant, it's obviously a lot more. If you're a retail store, it's a lot more. So you have to, what I'm trying to get you guys to do is just think about these things, as it relates to your specific business, and always just be making the best guess, that you can, right? So if you now know, all right, well, when I have an interaction with a customer, it's usually worth this. I usually have this many interactions per year. Okay, so if you multiply that times the number of years that, is the lifespan of a customer, 5 in this example. So if you're a restaurant and you have $20 checks, because you're a diner or something like that, and you figure people usually go in once a month, right? So that's 12, so that's 240. I should have done easier math in my head. So that's 240 times 5 years, right? That's 1,200, right? Hopefully that math is right. $1,200 is the lifetime value of a customer in our fictitious diner. Now that's revenue, that's the check. So if you're operating at 15% margin, right? So that's $180, okay? So that's the value, the lifetime value of a customer currently, right? Now the other thing that I think this should make you think about is the areas where you've had to make guesses. It would be worthwhile to put something in place to better track customers, to better track your data so that you don't have to make guesses. A year from now, when you look at this, and by the way, you should always be re-looking at the lifetime value of a customer. You should be constantly measuring it, and maybe updating that once, maybe even once a month. It depends on how many customers you have. But the whole idea here is to baseline it, track it, influence it, make it better, because it has so much upside, down the line. So, what are some things you should be thinking about also in order to increase all these different components? The average check value, the number of interactions you have with the customer, the time you have the customer, is the onboarding process. In other words, when you first get a new customer, you have a honeymoon period, and your ability to really let them know the different things that you offer, the different services that you offer, is really, really important, because you can then educate them on ways that might influence them having more interactions with you, them spending more, that sort of thing. So think about that. Maybe a frequently asked questions, a brochure, something along those lines, some sort of small gift with, information. The other thing to do is to think about increasing the average purchase, or the average revenue that comes in per encounter. One big way to do that is to have a CRM tool, like we have within NetBlaze, where you can keep an email list of all your customers. And let's say you're that diner, and that when it rains, your receipts go down about 20% because people don't want to come out. Okay, great. So then let's send out an email and say, hey, rainy day special. Come in before 6 o'clock and get a free appetizer or a free dessert or 10% off, whatever it is, doesn't matter. So in that way, what you're doing is you are influencing you're influencing these individual pieces of the components that make up the lifetime value. So you could do that. You could do sales and other sorts of promotional activities, which gets more people in, and increases the number of interactions that they have. You could do upsells and sort of complementary items, like, it's hard to do with a restaurant, but you can still do it in a restaurant. Like, special is, if you have the entree, then we'll give you an appetizer for 10% off if you want to order both, or or maybe if you're an HVAC contractor, you give folks good service on a repair, but you upsell them on a maintenance contract. That's a possibility. I mean, there's so many different ways. It's all going to be dependent upon your business. But anything that you can do to influence these individual levers that impact the lifetime value of a customer is just going to pay off in spades over, years of building your small local business. And lastly, I'll say that, the other thing is obviously you want to increase that lifespan of the customer. So you want them to be, you want them to use you for as long as they're in the local area, right? So forever. So you want to stay in their minds, and you can do that through social media quite a bit. If you get people to follow you on Facebook, you can give people updates on what's going on. Sorry about the sirens. This is what I was warning everybody about. So I think they're gone. But you can update people on the what's going on with your company, and maybe just some informational things, maybe some local area information, maybe some charity events that you're involved in. So just keeping yourself in their minds, that's what social media is so great for, and one of the reasons why it's one of the core things that we offer within NetBlaze to the folks who use us for their digital marketing. So I bet that's way more than you thought we could ever talk about with the lifetime value of a customer, but it is really, really important, and kind of at the end of the day sort of drives everything, right? I mean, the higher the lifetime value of a customer, the less you really need to have a successful venture, and it's hard to get new customers, as we know. So anyway, thanks for listening. If you need help with your digital marketing, please come see us over at netblaze.com. We have a wonderful software tool that handles all of your digital marketing for you. It's kind of a combination of software and services, and you can get a free 14-day trial. But I think you'll be very impressed with it. Netblaze.com. And so thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.